I'd tell you the details, but it'd sound like I made them up.
Your problem is you spent your whole life thinking there are rules. There aren't.
Believing as I do, like the good Dr. King said, a man should be judged on the content of his character, not the color of his skin.
Yeah, he's dead. You're gonna need a different quote.
I just charged for parking.
You think they're going to ask questions when they come with their pitchforks and their torches?
It's just a flying saucer. We gotta go.
I've had a piece of pie like that since the Garden of Eden.
Simply deliver a message when the time comes.
Message? To who?
To the wicked.
We're very friendly people.
No, that's not it. Pretty unfriendly, actually.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first official episode of Very Friendly People, a Fargo character analysis podcast. I am your humble host, Thomas Potts, and as always, I am joined by...
Jack Breedon.
Right, how are you doing, Jack?
I'm doing pretty good to join our first official episode. Definitely the first time we're recording this particular episode.
No technical difficulties whatsoever have occurred.
Yes, our podcast isn't cursed or being monitored by the government. We did criticise them in the introduction with the mention of cyber, and we didn't go to the recording to find out that the whole thing sounded like a robot having a meltdown.
That's true, yeah. But on the plus side, it means that we are actually able to release our first official episode on the same day that Fargo is coming back to Channel 4. So
exciting
I suppose
times.
It's quite serendipitous in that way.
It is. The stars have aligned for us, I think, exactly. in the face of our blight. We have a saving grace.
Yes, as always. It's wonderful.
Yes, and how are you doing?
I am doing pretty good. I'm very excited to break into our first character, who today we're going to be looking at failed insurance salesman turned murderer turned successful insurance salesman, Lester Nygaard.
And successful murderer.
Successful, well, for a while, at least.
Well, yes. Okay, I'll give you that. Was successful and then definitely very much was not.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's fair to say that Lester is the main character of season 1, would you say?
Yeah, I was having a little think about that before the recording. Definitely he's the main main focus of the season. He kicks off the whole mystery and story. Definitely starts out protagonist, and I was wondering, does he switch to antagonist? Does he switch to the villain, or can a character be both? I was wondering what your opinions on that, whether you could be the antagonist and protagonist at the same time.
I would say, yeah. I think that in the realms of Fargo and the archetypes which are set up in the Fargo-verse, you have your blacker than black villain characters who are almost, demons in the shape of humans. And then you have the real salt of the earth, usually policemen characters who are just shining examples of heroism. And then you have the moral grey area. You have the people in the middle who just kind of react. I was actually watching an interview with Martin Freeman, who plays the role of Lester, and he says that Lester is an incredibly reactive character. He just kind of bounces off all this kind of stimulus that he receives, and a lot of that stimulus is very negative, unfortunately, which speaks a lot about why this character has such a mounting level of aggression and animosity towards others.
Yeah, I like to think of it as magpieing. He finds little shiny nuggets within all these people that he kind of runs across, and he picks these out and adds them to his nest and kind of builds himself up to be this ideal quote unquote ideal salesman, husband, and man. I think he takes traits from Malvo, he takes traits from his brother, he takes traits from Sam Hess, all these people who are definitely a negative force, as you said, generally, but also directly to him as a person. And I think he kind of in one way or another, has a victory over these people, and as his reward, takes pieces of them and grows as a person.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said as a man as well, because I think a lot of season 1 is to do with the idea of kind of a fragile and toxic idea of masculinity.
Oh yeah, I was doing a bit of research before this about archetypes in general, and there's a whole bunch of stuff I won't get into because you could record a podcast for years about that. There's whole lists of like, this person's got the 12 archetypes, the 8 archetypes. And the one that I clicked on was the 301 archetypes. And I thought, I can't read all of this before the podcast. But one of them was, and this is not coming from someone who is a particular, I do have some understanding, but not a particular,
like an inclination towards.
Yeah, not an official position on such things, I suppose.
Right, okay, you're not like an expert.
Yeah, not an expert per se. I've done a little bit of light reading, and a lot of these archetypes, feeds into the ego, and one of them in particular was the innocent. I don't know which list this was in. This was in the list of 301, which compiled all these different archetypes from all types of fiction. And the innocent, coincidentally enough, was talking about being reactionary. And about being driven mainly by the ego, not in the sense of having an ego, although of course we find out Lester eventually grows one and kind of spills over, bubbles over out of control. But the innocent is driven by a need for security, and also in some places they talk about the innocent in the need for structure. And that's something that I think is key to Lester. He starts out as he has a reasonably structured and ideal life. He has a house and a loving quote unquote wife. He has a steady job. He has co-workers. He has family that he sees. And all of that is broken down and gotten rid of or destroyed. And much like gaining muscle at the gym, you do damage, you break down your muscle and your fat, and over the course of time that's built up to be stronger and stronger and bigger. And it's interesting. I thought, oh yeah, but he's not particularly an innocent. He's guilty of a hell of a lot of stuff throughout the show, through multiple murders and cover-ups and blackmailings and stuff of that sort.
I was going to say that you find that a lot with these sort of like morally grey characters throughout the show, is that there's this recurring line of "I'm the victim here," and it's this idea that somehow kind of absolves them of any bad things that they end up doing, because they're just reacting to the way that the world is towards them. And so when Lester ends up, he bludgeons his wife to death. But he sees it as just him kind of, taking control of his life, because even though he might feel secure in the life that he had, but he's clearly not happy.
Oh no, it's miserable. It's a miserable and toxic environment, from family to his wife to his workplace to outside of work. He's downtrodden, and the world, from his perspective, is kind of conspiring against him, I think.
All of a sudden, one day, he ends up in the same hospital room as Lorne Malvo.
Indeed.
And everything changes.
Yes, and we all know what happens there with those two. Chaos ensues.
In fact, this was actually the first image that writer Noah Hawley had for his idea for the season. He says he always starts with a single image for each season of Fargo. And he said with this one, he had the idea of a civilized man and an uncivilized man waiting in a hospital room together. And just sort of thinking, well, what would they talk about? How would they react to one another? Which leads on to a very interesting question. When Malvo offers to kill Sam Hess, the bully who's been picking on Lester his whole life, and again, there's later on, Malvo's going to say, when Lester says, "I didn't say yes," and Malvo says, "Well, you didn't say no." How intentional do you think that Lester is in that initial meeting?
Well, I think I'm going off a tangent here. TV at that time, the kind of early 2000s and the 90s, a lot of TV shows at the time had this anti-hero main character. You know, your Walter Whites, your Tony Sopranos. And it's interesting about being the innocent and about intention, and being the victim so much, or perceiving yourself as a victim. I think in Lester's case is a victim, and then developing into the victimizer. An interesting sort of archetype during that time of sympathetic people who do abhorrent things one episode, and then the next episode you sympathize fully with them. Obviously, you can't sympathize with bludgeoning your wife to death. I'm not, I'm not saying that I do, and I'm not saying anyone else who watches the show should, but you do understand it. You do know why he's done it, and before that, you sympathize with him fully, with him and the bullying from his wife and Sam Hess. And
I don't think she exchanges a single like kind word to him, or if she does, it's veiled in like this very Minnesotan passive aggressive of, you know, if you were a better salesman, I would have bought you a nicer tie. Like, you just like, ooh.
Yeah, this strange duality of such scathing and cutting remarks, but seemingly so positive, so happy, so chipper, so casual that you could just say it in the kitchen with his extended family there. And even his
including
brother,
his brother.
of course. Yeah,
yes, Jazz.
Yes, interesting point that he brings up about the character just in the show, saying that there's been something missing in him, isn't there? Something lacking within Lester since, you know, they were kids. Within other shows, Tony Soprano talks about his childhood. He talks about his life, and throughout all those six-ish, 7 technically seasons of The Sopranos, you see him always reflecting on his past, and then him going down a darker and darker road. With Walter White, of course, that's his whole journey of he starts off as this well-mannered chemistry teacher who has cancer. Again, very sympathetic, and then grows into this abhorrent, monstrous darkness who festers and infects all these other characters' lives. And it's just an interesting thing having these people start off as victims and having you understand these people, because I think obviously Lorne Malvo and characters like that are horrifying and scary, but I would argue that Lester is scarier.
Because Lester is more sort of a concrete person, whereas Malvo is this force of nature. Really, he is literally a force of evil that infects Lester, and, you know, pulls him around to this way of this dog eat dog way of seeing the world. Of like, you can either swim like a fish or you can eat like a shark.
Yeah, and it brings up the question. Obviously, you can't sympathise with Lorne Malvo. We enjoy watching him because he's such a good character, such a good actor, such good writing, an enjoyable, delicious evilness that you sit back and go, God,
kind of cool and suave nihilist.
Yeah, you thank God that he isn't in your life, but you enjoy watching him as a piece of fiction. But with someone like Lester or Soprano or Walter White or any other kind of anti-hero or almost Shakespearean Greek tragedy, you start off with a sympathetic person. It's scary.
Effectively.
Yeah. It's scary because you think, God, I know people like that. Or you look at parts of him and go, I felt exactly like he's felt. Or I look at this person and I see a reflection of myself or a relative or a friend or how I used to be or how I'm going to be. And they do, you know, they commit murder. They do these abhorrent acts. But underneath the psychology of these people, you sympathize, you empathize, you understand, and you're left with that feeling of kind of going, well, am I so different? Could I be corrupted in similar circumstances? You're left walking away going, well, thank God the bad guy's gone. You're left with a thought of going, God, who's next? Could that be me in another life? Could that be me tomorrow? Could something happen that I twist and turn? And also raises the question of what is the nature of evil, I think. Is it something born with, Was Lester born with this void, this hole? And is that void in all of us? Is that void and hole evil? Is Lorne the devil incarnate, born as such, and that is his destiny? And could Lester be saved? And they're not really, in a show like this, these are quite grand, possibly nihilistic questions that the characters, ponder, and certain themes, they kind of blossom little ideas or answers from particular points of view. But the show doesn't go out a way of having a complete philosophy on such things, which is interesting, and I think fairly unique for a TV show.
It is.
And I think very reflective of life. Nothing has a concrete answer. It's just what you make of it, I suppose.
I mean, it's weird for me, like, coming at this from, somebody who identifies as a Christian. And this is something I've talked to my brother about, who's also a Christian. We were saying that, like, there are elements of the gospel within Fargo, but one thing that tends to not be brought up is the idea of redemption and forgiveness. Because I have to believe that, everybody has a chance to reform, but obviously not everybody's going to take that chance. I think that Lester could easily have, like, went backwards, but or rather repented. Yeah, but it's clear that he just has no intention of going back. And when you see him become more confident, and you see he's like, it's weirdly, he almost seems to look younger at the following year.
Yes, that's exactly what I thought as well. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah, with his gelled, slicked up hair and his new suit and his new wife. It is like he's been reborn almost.
His entire worldview has completely been deconstructed and reassembled, and now everybody is a means to an end for him. Whereas before he was, he's described in the original script as the kind of man who apologizes when you stand on his foot.
Yeah.
Now he's the one who is just,
who's standing on people's toes to get what he wants.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, breaking down his whole essence, his whole life, to then build it up stronger again, in the image of Lorne Malvo and Hess and all these other people, the people who he kind of idolizes in a twisted way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think you see, obviously, there's a soundtrack. There's a song in the soundtrack to the first season that is called Lester as Malvo, and I think anyone watching the show could easily pick up the sort of subtle clues that he himself has become a new man, like Malvo. And so when he sees him again, he very uncharacteristically, to the old Lester anyway, sort of bullies him into admitting who he is when he's pretending to be the dentist. He's going, "I'm new, I'm you now, I'm the new and improved. Why don't you prove to me who you are, or what you're capable of?"
Love the bit where he shows. I love the bit where he shows his award to Malvo, and he's like, "Hey, look what I won, Insurance Man of the Year." And there's this kind of like, "Daddy, are you proud of me?" kind of thing. Because it's sort of exactly like, hey, you were the master, but now, hey, look what I've done all by myself.
It's the ego, the innocent ego, that childlike kind of always trying to prove to people. I think what's missing in him, evidently for what his own family's like, is been reassurance and approval. He always does something, he always messes something up, and everyone always judges him or chastises him or says, "Oh, it's all your fault, you're doing this incorrectly, why don't you be a better salesman, a better husband, a better brother, a better man?"
Going back to his brother as well, I mean, like the bit where he says, "Sometimes I tell people you're dead."
Yeah,
God, and he says, people, all my co-workers, they look up to their brothers, and it's clear that there's this, animosity between these brothers, which seems to be a recurring theme throughout every single season, the idea of kind of feuding brothers.
Absolutely. Again, another sort of biblical influence within the show.
Cain and Abel, Esau and Jacob.
Exactly. And like, obviously, like the Bible, there's this unspeakable evil seeking to corrupt, to tempt man into sin by taking the bite of the apple from the Garden of Eden and all that with Malvo. And so the question I wanted to ask you is,
yes,
with Lester, the way he ended up, would you say? Obviously, you've said that you believe in everyone having a second chance and redemption and all that, and that's something that I believe. Even as an atheist, I believe that everyone deserves a chance to change and better themselves. But do you think that Lester would have ended up like this without all his outside influence? Do you think that maybe he is his own worst enemy, and perhaps just something to do with his core, the way he grew up as a child, the way that his family interacted with him? Do you think that without Malvo, he would still end up perhaps less evil, but still a corrupted man?
In some ways, I think there's an argument to be made of the idea of, and this goes for some of quite a few of the characters throughout the show, is that there's some ambiguity as to how real these characters are.
Yes.
I remember thinking about the idea of Malvo being this force that infects people, and it reminded me of in Twin Peaks, there's the character of Killer Bob, who is simply referred to as Bob is the evil that men do. So in many ways, you could make an argument that that Malvo is just a voice inside Lester's head to a certain degree. That it is literally just all the mounting pressures and, like you say, all these kind of ideas about masculinity that he has absorbed like a sponge, that just one dreadful night when the washing machine breaks, he just snaps.
And that's a wonderful motif as well, him and his washing machine.
Which is his marriage. His washing machine is his marriage. And you can see from the very beginning, it is grinding away and it's slowly just kind of...
And he's frustrated with it.
Yes.
He's frustrated with it, and I'm pretty sure he hits it as well when it's all grumbling away down. He's just so frustrated, he's resorting to violence. Obviously,
and he describes
different degree.
He describes the sound that it makes as being angry, which I think kind of relates to sort of like underneath this very sweet table talk, there is all this brimming resentment that's also between him and his wife.
Absolutely, of course, and then of course he trades it in for a new model, so to speak.
With that beautiful little soundtrack piece, which is called
favorite. It's my favorite piece of the soundtrack of this whole show, possibly of any show. Oh, that wonderful little ukulele, and it's a very Coen brother moment of him just staring, almost religiously, kind of worshipping it, just watching it, washing and spiraling and circling around.
And there's also the idea of like, ooh, I'm clean now. I was stained by my sin, but now I've been, cleansed in the loving arms of my washing machine. It's very American satire, isn't it, of consumerism and commercialization.
Oh God, yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to talk about with Lester, with talks about archetypes that we discussed previously, and these people not being people, but more being characters and having sort of messages, being part of a fable, almost a biblical story of good versus evil, and all these different types of characters and how they all weave into each other. Of course, there is a prototype Lester within Jerry Lundegaard.
Yes,
who's the prototype from the Fargo movie. He shares a hell of a lot of similarities. Obviously, salesman, bumbling, downtrodden, similar last name, both ending in Guard, of course. Both end up in different ways causing the death of their wives, both seeking out criminal intent, seemingly for a good reason. Well, not a good reason, but
Well, it's interesting because I feel that in the movie version,
Yeah.
which again, season 1 is almost a kind of remake of the movie, but with quite a few like aesthetic changes and obviously set in a more modern time frame.
Yeah.
But Jerry almost kind of starts out with less good intentions than Lester does. But Lester tends to be the one who probably goes further down the dark side than Jerry ever does.
Yes, definitely. He's definitely
Jerry is more of the
extreme.
evil. Yeah, Jerry is more of the evil of sort of just passivity, of just letting things happen, whereas Lester is far more proactive.
Yeah, and I think with Jerry, it's more out of desperation, a need for money. Again, that sort of talking about consumerism being a literal a used car salesman, that kind of character type, and he's literally is that. He plots to have his wife fake kidnapped, but also real kidnapped, and to extort money out of her father. And so that's more overtly sort of capitalistic, sort of pursuit of money. Where I think Lester is more of the internal capitalist, definitely the most extreme, resorting to violence, and instead of desperation, it's a resentment underneath that you see in a lot of characters of that kind of neurotic, sociopathic, ego-driven businessman, who kind of builds himself up to have this persona, this life, the fast car, to prove to the world and to themselves that they're better than what they actually are underneath, maybe.
Absolutely, yeah.
And of course, we need to discuss the actor.
Martin Freeman, yes.
What a wonderful, wonderful performance in this show. Definitely my favourite of his entire career. A difference. He's playing against his own type, I think, for when you look back at The Office and all the comedy stuff he's done, from Love Actually and Bilbo in The Hobbit. He's kind of the well-meaning, and they face some troubles, some adversities to overcome, some temptations, but overall they're good-hearted people, and they come out on top.
I think it's interesting, like looking at Martin Freeman's acting style, because he does have a very distinctive twitchiness and kind of a stammering nature to him, which works well when he plays these very sort of meek, nice guys. And I feel that it's being utilized in a different way to sort of show the more sort of deceptive and more kind of again, not like more sort of just weaselly and like a slightly less likable character as well. With but again, like at the beginning, you feel as if it is like a Tim kind of character, just a very sympathetic and guy just trying to get through life. But then as it goes on, that twitchiness and stammering, it takes on a more sort of sinister quality.
Yeah, he kind of the constant twitchiness, I think, develops and grows into more spaced out, larger actions of force. Instead of twitchiness, he now makes one big blow to his wife, of course, and then he kind of goes back to the twitchiness, and over the course he makes big decisions, big choices, big ideas, and gets away with it, and kind of develops a more calm exterior.
Yes. But the bit in the one of the interrogation scenes, when because obviously he's got a bit of shrapnel in his hand from the gun blast that Malvo used to kill the sheriff. And you notice that when he gets asked rather uncomfortable questions, there's a shot from underneath the table, and you see that he's kind of itching at the scab. But then you come back over the table, and he's perfectly composed. But he keeps just like scratching at it, like furiously, but while still looking very calm at the from the top of the table.
It's kind of a Lady Macbeth moment, the washing from the blood off her hands, but seemingly can't wash away that sin in that private moment, but outwardly is, proclaiming their innocence.
I mean, that's one wound that is very sort of focused on in the show. It's not exactly talked about, but you can tell that it's focused on. But one other wound, which isn't brought up quite as much, but I think is really interesting to look into, is his nose. Obviously,
broken nose.
His nose gets broken in his encounter with Sam Hess. And then, obviously, the very next scene is the bit where he meets Malvo. So you could see almost that is the that broken nose is the straw that breaks the camel's back. Then when he gets the more successful life and his face is fine, but then in the final battle with Malvo, it's very interesting. He gets a bloody nose once more, as if to say, you might have got a new suit and a new haircut, but nothing's changed. You're still the same man underneath it all.
It's still a dog-eat-dog world. Just because you've one-upped the previous predator, it doesn't mean that you're not next on the chopping block.
Just because you killed Jesse James doesn't make you Jesse James.
Indeed, exactly. And kind of discussion on his appearance as well. Obviously, his adorable, iconic, big orange jacket.
Like a little puffer jacket like you see kids wear.
Exactly like that. I was reading in the book. I'll just grab it here. Oh God, it is a big book. Jesus Christ, the big Fargo.
Not even in the same house, and I felt that.
You felt the shockwave of me turning the page. There's a passage in it from Carol Case, who's the series costume designer. It says here for the first 3 seasons, but I would assume for the 4th as well. But of course, this book was written before the 4th season was out. And they kind of bring up the fact, well, Noah Hawley, in fact, brings up the fact that it was important to him that there was a Charlie Brown factor to Lester, and the orange coat was that factor for him.
Yes.
And of course, for people who don't know Charlie Brown, I mean, everyone knows who Charlie Brown is. I assume the kind of ego-driven, innocent character looking for security and everything in his life is kind of kicked up in a big whirlwind, and he's desperately trying to understand what's going on in life, and he's this downtrodden little cartoon character. That's what I see Lester as. He's not. I don't mean cartoonish as an insult. Obviously, he's not an outlandish persona per se. But there is something cartoony about his design, both costume-wise and character-wise. I feel.
I agree.
I'm not quite sure why I feel like that, though. I think maybe because when you're designing cartoons, you want something recognizable. Obviously, if you're designing someone to look evil, you want them to look, if you look to old Disney movies, all the villains look absolutely horrifying and grotesque and evil and that kind of such. And you want the cutesy characters to look cute with the big eyes and the fluffiness and the big ears and all that. And it's interesting. And again, I suppose with Disney's progression, they had the secret villain reveal, and in Pixar of the seemingly nice guy who turns out to be not quite as good as he outwardly appears to be.
Very true. Yeah, I'd say that Lester definitely falls into that category. But it's interesting as well that because we he's also the character that we follow. So, his villainy is almost as much a surprise to himself as it is to us.
Yeah. Comparatively to Malvo, who definitely is planning his next move and is definitely taking every opportunity he can to stir shit up. Like we were discussing earlier, Lester is just reactionary. He just goes with his gut. He just goes with, oh God, how do I get out of this? And it's that kind of need for survival, I think. We'll go into this later, but there's a lot of animalistic nature within this show and with all the characters, which we'll kind of discuss at the end of this episode.
Beforehand, though, Jack, I've got a question for you. What is the point for you where you lost sympathy with Lester? When did Charlie Brown become Charlie Manson? As it were.
Interesting. I've been rewatching. I'm gonna keep talking about Sopranos. I do apologize. We will talk about fucking Fargo once in this show, but I have been rewatching it. I'm not saying won't have spoilers for people who haven't listened to that show, who haven't watched that show, because it is an absolute masterclass. It's on par with Fargo as some of the greatest television out there. And you flick through one episode, and all these characters have these really deep moments. And David Chase, who's the showrunner of that show, even the most detestable gangster characters will have little moments of heartbreak and real psychological issues. There's one episode I watched recently in which Tony Soprano wakes up in the middle of the night crying and weeping, saying he should just kill himself and he's never felt so depressed. And it's all a big nothing, which is a line that's uttered by his own mother frequently throughout the show. And then a few episodes later, he does something like he murders someone, or he cheats on his wife, or he conspires to kill people who are close to him within the show. Obviously, I don't want to go to details because that's spoilers, but he really does some reprehensible things and it's such a weird juggling act between these characters, because David Chase wanted to go, yep, I wanted to keep reminding people that having sympathy for these characters is almost what they want. And that's a thing brought up in that show. And it's a thing brought up in this show, is the victim or the victimizer playing the victim. They, at some point, definitely were a victim, and you go, yep, I feel for them. They're definitely wronged there, and they deserve some justice, or they deserve a happy life. And I think the point in The Sopranos, there's so many that happen, and then the next episode you feel straight back to having sympathy again. And in this show, it's again difficult, because even at his last moment, I feel I think I did cry the first time I watched Lester fall through the ice.
Ooh.
And I don't know if I could pinpoint a moment. I think definitely the murder of his second wife definitely is probably the most reprehensible act he does throughout the whole show. So if it didn't have to gun to my head, that's the moment I'd pick. But
same.
It's again that weird issue, that weird that dialogue that we're having, that but we're having in the show, and I think people do in life, is, can there be redemption after it all? Is there something that someone does that means, right, that is the end point? There is no return after that. And
I would say that scene is, that for me, the pivotal moment, because on a purely physical level, it is Lester saying, I do not want to take responsibility for my actions. I don't want to face the music. I know that I deserve this, but I am going to let an innocent stand in the way and get the death that I clearly have deserved through doing this. But on a metaphorical level, the fact that he gives Linda his coat, his Charlie Brown coat, and she gets shot wearing that, it is very much him, like this new evil Lester putting to death the old Lester.
Yes, yeah, it's a passing of the torches of the innocent victim. He's shedding his last skin, as it were, and giving
And
it to
is
her.
his scapegoat, yeah.
Yeah, oh god, absolutely. Yeah, he's literally led the lamb to the slaughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the line just before where he's like, "Put your hood up. I wouldn't want to see your pretty face to freeze." I mean, it's just it sends a shiver down your spine.
It really does, and that moment, that line in particular, you're right. I'd almost forgotten about that. That was just detestable. I remember literally going, "Ugh, God, how you scumbag! How fucking dare you!" But still, at the last moment of his life, I still cried. And I don't know what that says about me. I don't know if you had a similar, what your reaction was to his end.
Yeah, I know. I think I don't think I had that visceral and emotional reaction, but I think looking back, and when you see the bigger picture, and you you do feel sorry for the guy because as like, I think, you know, you need to have sympathy with a lot of people who do bad things, because a lot of the time it is a result of, you know, a lot of bad stuff in their life, or even just like
Upbringing
that.
or influence, nature versus
Exactly.
nurture. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the strongest like thing that you can do really is just pity them. Really,
Yes.
I think that's the way. You have to be a very friendly person, but not in a you know, surface level way in which, you know, Lester's wife might have done it, or a few of the other characters might have done it. But that's to be a genuine sort of recognition of like, no, this is a person, and this person may have made a few missteps, but who hasn't? And so seeing when you do see Lester literally running on thin ice, as he has been throughout the entire show, and that moment where that almost Wile E. Coyote moment, where he looks
again,
down and
sees
sees the ice cracking, and then looks up as if to just be like, well, good grief.
Yeah, give me a break. This again, and then straight through the ice. Yeah,
his little hat just poking out at the top.
Yeah. Again, he's a cartoon character in the best way possible. He's the embodiment of an archetype of almost slapstick comedy. I mean, there probably is some literal slapstick comedy. You know, there's nose breaking and
the fact that like Sam doesn't even hit him; he just runs into the window.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and people say that all comedy is based off of oh god, what's the word?
Element of tragedy.
Yes, yeah, and I suppose
in spades,
how he could laugh at those moments and still weep. You could laugh at his life and weep at his life.
I mean, you could practically. Yeah, I think Lester practically hears the canned laughter in his head every time he slips on the ice or whatever.
Oh god, yeah, absolutely, yeah, and like that duality, he has that. He has done good things and he has done bad things. And you know, no one's born evil, of course. No one is destined to be a monster. Although you could argue perhaps Malvo, if he is the devil.
Of course, we don't really know Malvo's backstory, but as Lester, we get a very clear idea of the kind of life this guy's had.
Even from school, we hear from multiple characters about what he was like as a kid.
Fainting at the sight of blood, and then you see later on when he's in the elevator with Malvo and he just ices those guys, and I think he just slightly flinches when he gets some blood in his eye, but he doesn't look away.
No,
you just see how much this guy has changed and become so cold and hardened. It's an astonishing transformation to watch. And again, as I always say, like, because, you know, Breaking Bad, you know, obviously, you know, so many people have gone on about the show, but Fargo manages to achieve in one season what Breaking Bad took about, like, I don't know, 18 seasons to do. I can't even remember how long it is now.
Yeah, it's a lot of seasons. Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah, without it feeling rushed either.
Exactly.
There's only 10 episodes, and he's in all 10 episodes, of course, being the main character. But it does feel like a weirdly natural progression. There's no leaps of logic within this show. There's nothing that makes you go, oh, that's a bit. I was always going to say, oh, that's a bit cartoony villain, even though I've just described him as such. But I think people in real life are cartoons. I'm constantly seeing people in life who, by the clothes they wear, or by the things that they do, by the mannerisms, or by the lives they lead, I'm like, surely someone's written this. This can't just be how life is. All these weird coincidences and turns of events and twists and turns within life.
All the world's a stage.
All the world is a stage, exactly. And we discussed about him being an archetype, but the point of archetypes, of characters, you know, what are characters? Sure, they're fictional, but of course, if they were so far into fiction, into be something completely abstract, no one would be able to recognize it. But we do recognize it. We recognize Lester.
We have to acknowledge that there is the potential, like Lester, to go from the lovable schmuck to the predatory villain.
Yeah, and you have that question of he's fooled himself, either consciously or subconsciously, in believing that he is this this victim, this main character, and that he can do no wrong, or if he does do wrong, it's all for the greater purpose of surviving. And you kind of go, well, I wonder what I've done. I wonder what I could do.
I think one reason I respect this show is that I think that with something like a Breaking Bad, that there is a tendency to lionize the anti-hero, and and you know, make it seem like, oh, you know, you see these like compilation clips of like, oh, badass Heisenberg moments, and
Let's look at the Joker and how he's cool and edgy. And you're right, we do live in a society. It's like, yes, I guess.
Whereas with Lester, I appreciate the fact that I don't think he ever quite goes over to being cool, but he's trying.
He's so trying, exactly, yeah.
I think my favorite moment of like just like the closest that Lester Nygaard goes to badass is the bit when he's confronted by the Hess sons again, and he picks up a stapler and he like he hits them with the stapler, and instead of uttering like a badass line, he just goes, "Yeah, how about that?"
It is such a like schoolyard fight kind of moment. I mean, that's kind of just his character, isn't it? It's just he was the nerdy kid who was picked on, and he's now having to fight someone in the playground. Yes. And I suppose he's not even aware of kind of repercussions if things go too far, like you are as a kid.
Good point, yeah.
I think as a character, he's definitely, as a character, much like the ice at the end, he's just not solid. Everything about him is either flaky or shaky or easily changed and malleable or broken. He's just not sure about himself because everyone is telling him that he's wrong, but deep down, and of course, like the poster, you know, below, what if they're wrong and you're right? How can you even be sure if everyone is telling you this one thing, but you believe another? How can you believe yourself, or how can you believe them? And whether or not both can be true. Whether or not people outside can have certain points of view and judge you on actions, but you deep down are right about another.
Exactly.
And there is that duality. You have to believe in both. And he tricks himself into believing only in the one. And that one is himself.
That's true, yeah.
Survival
of the fittest.
It really is. It really is.
But I think what we've been able to conclude is that Lester Nygaard, above all things, is human. Or is he, Jack?
Ooh!
That's right. It's time for our brand new segment.
It is time for No Saints in the Animal Kingdom. This is the part of the show where we rank the character that we've been talking about within the animal food chain, as it were.
Yeah, we've discussed this over the years, kind of sort of since we first known each other. God, how many years ago is that? Was that 4 years ago? 5? Let me think. It was at the start of university, and I was there for 3 years. And I think it's been a year and a bit, maybe 2. So it's been over about 4 and a bit years. Bloody hell!
Time flies.
Still haven't chucked you. Force me on his bloody podcast. It's that weird. Obviously, throughout fiction, there is that kind of anthropomorphizing of characters. My favorite book is Watership Down. And everyone listening to this will know of a film or a book or a play or a song or whatever that features main characters that are animals. You've got the Red Wolf, got, Watership Down. You've got loads of animated kids movies and stuff.
That's Mr. Fox, my favourite movie.
But, exactly, yes. And also throughout fiction and throughout writing, you have loads of metaphors, loads of the development of language and etymology all have comparisons of things to animals. You have crocodile tears. It's raining cats and dogs. You're the alpha. You're the lone wolf of the pack. You're the black sheep of the family. And it's such a weird sort of phenomenon. Well, I suppose not weird. I suppose it's understandable that you look to the natural world when you're first developing a language and a culture and a society and a manner of exchanging information. You look at what there is. You know, you describe something to do with nature and the world and what you can see and point at. What I'm interested in is people embodying animals, not just looking weaselly, you know, or you know, someone being the size of an elephant, or oh, she's an old cow, or you know, this or that, but someone physically portraying the animalistic nature of the world, the kind of hierarchy of prey and predator and that kind of thing. And obviously, Lorne Malvo discusses this within the show itself. You know, we used to be gorillas. The fact that the symbolism of Gus and the wolf. And I think we can always describe. I think what we're trying to do in this show is describe every character as an animal that they perhaps evoke or inspired by or are possessed, that energy they're possessed of almost.
If Disney was to take all of Fargo and animate all the characters as animals, if this was Zootopia, basically.
Is this a Zootopia or Zootopia?
If this was the bloodiest parts of Zootopia that you never got to see, who would everybody be?
Yeah. And so, I think we've got different ideas. I think there's multiple interpretations we have for Lester. So I don't think we're going to settle on just one. But what are your initial ideas on Lester Nygaard? Where does he fit within the social hierarchy, within the animal kingdom?
I mean, I want to quickly do a shout out to a theory I stumbled upon. I can't take credit for this one at all. This is from a YouTube channel called Leadhead, who did a great video essay about season 1 of Fargo and the character of Lester, and an old, I believe it's a Japanese legend, talking about the koi fish dragon. And this legend stipulates that there's all these different koi fish who are always trying to swim upstream up this mountain. And a lot of koi fish, they can't make it to the top. But at the top, there's a dragon. And if any koi fish manages to swim to the top, that dragon will then bestow upon the koi fish the mantle of dragon, and the koi fish becomes a dragon. And so I think that there's definite parallels you can draw with the idea of Lester being this little fish with his little orange puffer jacket, literally just swimming with the tide. Then one day he turns against the tide, and in doing so becomes this predatory beast, this dragon. And of course, there's a lot of fish symbolism throughout the show. Usually equating with death. You notice you've got the gangsters who were killed by Malvo. They're eaten at the seafood restaurant. You've got Lester's poster, of course, which gets stained with his wife's blood. You get the fish tornado scene, which kills Stavros's son, and you get the screensaver of the aquarium on the guy who ends up freezing to death after escaping from Malvo's trunk.
Yeah, and of course, at the end, he's now sleeping with the fishes.
Yes, I mean, he literally falls through the ice, and I suppose in that sense, he's a dragon who ends up with his wings clipped and ends up back in the river as a fish.
Yeah, it's interesting with his coat being orange and the fish being orange in the poster. A good little sort of detail within that show. This show is full of stuff like that. Yes. But I kind of envision, going with the fish thing, almost like a clownfish. Finding Nemo.
He's Marlin.
He's Marlin.
He's Marlin from Finding Nemo, who just one day, instead of the barracuda eating his wife, he just gets a little bit of coral and just
bludgeons his fish wife to death.
No, I don't need that image in my head now. Oh dear.
I don't know if that's more or less depressing than the actual scene in Finding Nemo, to be fair. But yeah, like the clownfish, you big orange cartoony, Marlin, and like actual clownfish, he surrounds himself in a protective den, in a sea anemone, this stinging, swaying, patient life form that they're immune to. And he does this with Malvo, I think. He surrounds Malvo in his life, with their constant meetings, and then also taking of his persona, he wraps it around himself as this sort of protective blanket away from whatever's out there in the vast deep ocean.
But outside of that, and speaking on my own terms here, my own private theory is of well, I mean, there's a bit where Hess refers to Lester as having a rat face.
Yes.
And there is something rodent-like about his acuteness towards self-preservation. You always find, and his twitchiness, exactly. Yeah. But also going back to the death of Linda as well. I just remember when he sends Linda out to go first to get shot by Malvo. It reminded me of this quote, which is, it's the early bird that gets the worm, but it's the second mouse that gets the cheese. And the idea of a mouse who's smart enough to send the first mouse to get the cheese from the trap so that it'll be caught, so that he can then run in and get the cheese, in much the same way that Lester then runs in to try and get the plane tickets out of his wife's jacket.
Yeah.
And so I think, for me, Lester is a mouse who one day figures out how to operate a mousetrap. That's what makes him so dangerous.
Absolutely, and I suppose if you ascribe to the viewpoint of Malvo being this poison within Lester's life, you could take that rat analogy a step further, or in a different direction, I suppose. The kind of plague rat of that, they're just they're just going about their life. They're they're looking for food. They're doing what rats do, I guess. But they're this carrier for this death, this evil, this darkness in their bodies that they seemingly are immune to. They're not dying from it, but everything that they touch is infected with it.
That's really good.
Or you could go in the complete other direction. Again, go to the cartoon, and he is the Jerry to Malvo's Tom.
Very much so, and I mean, he is Jerry Nygaard, so that would make a lot of sense, wouldn't it?
Too true. Yes, that's too true. Actually, yeah. I'm desperately trying to think if there's a Tom connection anywhere, but I don't think there is. I suppose he's got a similar hair colour to Lon Malvo later on.
Does
this sort of greying silver fox?
We'll think about it for the next episode, which will probably end up being Malvo.
Yes. Oh, yes. Definitely. Yeah. Most likely, probably being Malvo.
Yeah. So, what do you think, Jack?
Yeah.
What do you think Lester is to you?
I think you can't discuss him without discussing Malvo, and so I'm not going to touch too much upon Malvo. That's his. He'll have his own episode.
Yeah.
But Malvo is definitely quintessentially the wolf in sheep's clothing. He dresses himself up to be trying to help out anyone he meets from a particular situation, but ends up, causing more chaos and getting what he wants out of it, which is usually his prey. And I think Lester's the exact opposite. I mean, you could say he's a wolf in sheep's clothing later on, especially with Linda and all the people. He is this sociopath. He is this predator who's perceived himself off as a victim. But I like to think he's the exact opposite. I like to think he's the sheep in wolf's clothing. He is this twitchy, nervous, neurotic, innocent, this ego-driven, looking for security within the herd. Or it's flock, isn't it, with sheep, I think.
Yeah.
But he surrounds himself within the coating of a wolf, within a wolf's coat, I suppose, to try and fit in, to try and get one up on everyone else, that he is now above everyone else around him on the animal kingdom, the hierarchy list. He's the predators at the top who feed off the bottom, instead of just being the sheep that he was throughout his whole life, just following along what everyone thought of him. They told him he was pathetic and worthless, and he's going to go nowhere, and for a long time he did. He believed that, and he took it on his chin, and he went with it.
I guess he's just a sheep who's just found another shepherd.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, another biblical
absolutely
influence. Yeah. And we'll talk about that more in Malvo's episode, which I think is going to be a good one. There's going to be hell of a lot to discuss with him. So look forward to that in the next couple of weeks.
Beans.
Yeah.
Sweet. Any final thoughts on Lester Nygaard, Jack?
On Lester Nygaard, I think we've discussed how long have we been going for. How long has this shit been running? Almost an hour. Yeah. So I suppose in conclusion, understanding he is the most human, which is a scary thought, but a comforting thing. I think, because there's something we can learn from this. I think him existing within media, we can almost save ourselves. Again, perhaps another biblical reference, having these passages, these stories, these chapters of all these characters and their people's lives, and we take something from that. A lesson or an understanding.
Absolutely. It's a moral tale, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah. It's an Aesop's fable. It's absolutely, again, another animal story of conflicting ideologies of creatures. So yeah, in conclusion, I have sympathy, or empathy. I have I have pity, as you said. Pity for this character. I'd like to think that without these toxic influences, he would have been a nice guy. But ultimately, like a Greek tragedy, it just had to be. A thoroughly enjoyable character, well written, exquisitely acted, such a treat to exist in this time so that I could watch this character. What a great show.
Yeah, it's kind of good, this show, isn't it? Yeah,
it's all right. Yeah,
we should start a podcast.
We should start a podcast. Yeah, all right. Let's get a recording, man. Okay.
Okay, right. So
what are your conclusions?
Say a little prayer for Lester Nygaard.
Yeah.
I would say, and
Charlie Brown.
Yeah, I guess what one final thought is just I remember when Fargo came out, and around the same time I heard that Martin Freeman was going to be playing Richard III on theatre, and thinking, I don't see that working at all, because obviously I'd only known Martin Freeman from all these very nice guy performances. And then there's this one shot in, I think it's the penultimate episode, where you see Lester literally sat upon a throne talking to all of his business colleagues. And I was like, I get it now. I totally see how he could play Richard III now.
Yep, the sympathetic, seemingly sympathetic, downtrodden character who accepts the identity of the villain. And that dual antagonist protagonist again.
Right. Well, I think that is going to bring us to a close. So thank you very, very much for joining us for our first official episode. We hope you've enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you guys. Thank you so much for everyone who's liked the pages or followed us online. Over 100 likes on Facebook, which is absolutely
thank goodness
insane. And looking at, because obviously this podcast is on RSS, it is on Spotify, it's on Podbean, and on YouTube. And I think overall we've got over 100 listens across those four platforms, which is just blown my expectations out of the water. This truly is such a nice thing to look at, to know that people enjoy listening to our inane and insane ramblings about a TV show that not many people have watched.
And I'm hoping that this might encourage more people to give the show a watch.
Oh God, yeah! If you've listened to this and haven't watched the show, what the hell have you done? None of this is going to make sense. I mean, thanks for listening. I mean, I'm not gonna not say thanks, but I'm gonna judge.
You've just had us on in the background as just like white noise and be like, I like the way that I like the noises they've been making.
The noises,
but I don't understand any of it.
That's the greatest compliment I've ever had. Yeah, I like the noises he's making.
Okay, well, tune in next time when we're gonna take a little look at Lorne Malvo.
Yes, exciting times. The snake in the garden.
Mm-hmm. So until then, I guess we want to quickly have a shout out to George Matthew for doing our incredible theme tune.
Oh god, yeah, absolutely phenomenal. We've posted on our Facebook page all the links that you can go and find all of his other music stuff.
Mm-hmm. As well as being on Facebook, we're also on Twitter, so you can follow us there as well at VeryFriendlyPeople.
And another massive thank you for the wonderful artwork that we've got. That I feel really evokes the artwork for all seasons of the show.
It just looks so pretty.
Yeah, by Dan Rhys. So thank you very much. You can follow him on Instagram at rhyssery.illustrator. Again, the links to that are on Facebook and Twitter, which you can find at VeryFriendlyPeople. Just search that on Facebook, Twitter, on YouTube, on RSS, on Spotify, on Podbean. You will probably know about one of those if you're listening to this. Otherwise, how would you have found this? But yes, and that concludes our very first proper, official, definitely first time that we've recorded this episode of the show.
So thank you so much for listening. Take care. Wrap up warm. It's cold out, and we will talk to you next time.
Yes, see you later.
Betcha.
You betcha.